possible aftermath of Brexit, we turn to our panel in Beijing. Cui Hongjian, who is the director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Joining us in London, we have Iain Begg, professor and professional research fellow at the European Institute of the London School of Economics and Political Science. And also, we are joined in Shanghai, China, by Mick Adams, who is the vice president of the European Chamber and chair of the Shanghai chapter. Welcome to our program. Gentlemen, may I start by asking you, Mr. Begg, what do you think might be the decision from the two chambers of the parliament? Are they likely to agree with one another, or they would like to kick the football always to each other's court?
They may not agree with each other, but the House of Commons will always prevail. So it's almost a certainty that if you look behind me at the building, you'll see the two parliaments. They'll be trying to agree today on the amendments proposed by the House of Lords, but if it comes to a contest, the House of Commons always wins because it's able to reject what the House of Lords said. And that means that later today we can expect the Article 50 bill, the bill to launch the process of leaving the European Union, to become a law and therefore enable Theresa May to press the button to start Brexit moving.
At this point, Mr. Adams, we understand about the EU citizens, their rights inside the UK is still a big question mark. That's where the debate is. Where do you think it is going eventually?
Well, I think that sort of both sides have very strong interest in reaching an amicable settlement in relation to their citizens that are in each other's territories. European citizens living and working in the UK contribute a great deal to the UK's economy, just as British citizens living in the EU. And I think both sides are agreed that it's not in anybody's interest to harm those relationships and harm individuals' daily lives.
I see.
But it's become a bit of an initial bargaining chip that's been discussed.
Well, common sense is common sense, but politics is always like politics itself, make it ever more complicated. Mr. Cui, what do you think? Optimistic, pessimistic, any conclusion?
Yes, I think that so far, yes, I think for this Brexit process, certainly there will be maybe some more uncertainties, not only the challenger from the Parliament, especially the House of Lords, but of course, as we know, according to the British government attitude, certainly a fast or maybe a kind of a hard Brexit will be in the interest of UK. But of course, they will have some more debate among the British people. As we know, still there are struggle between the Remain group and the Exit group, and also of course some other gaming between the UK and the EU.
Well, of course, at the very beginning, when the referendum was being done with 52% to 48%, not that much difference between the numbers of two groups, but we will see how they would eventually come. In fact, politics takes visions.
Yes.
We don't want to go into details whether it is visionary or not when the UK voters decided to leave the EU, but certainly it was visionary, Mr. Begg, if we could be frank here, even 45 years after it. I mean, the UK and China established diplomatic relationship formally. That, of course, is a very visionary and significant event. But now things have changed so much. What would all of these nuances going on with your national politics mean for this relationship, Mr. Begg?
I wish I could tell you with clarity, but unfortunately it's all very obscure. And we've even had the announcement this morning from Scotland that the Scottish First Minister has announced she will seek a second referendum on Scottish independence, which will complicate things even further. I think that China inevitably is going to be a significant partner for the UK in or out of the European Union. China is a big investor in the UK. It's a significant market, although we have to put this in perspective and recognize that although Chinese markets, the exports that the UK sells to China are significant, they're still below what the UK currently sells to Little Ireland, just across the Irish Sea from us. So the arithmetic of this is significant. It's not as though China can replace the European Union in Scotland's markets. Right. That's an important point to make. And the second point to make is that the relationship with China is one on which the UK will want to build, but it's not one which is going to transform UK economic prospects.
Right. China and the UK, Mr. Adams, I'm sure you review that part of history almost every day. Established diplomatic relations 45 years ago. And then about Hong Kong's return to China, the two sides also had eventually a successful agreement. And now it is certainly moving into a very new stage of development. How would you characterize the changes if a Brexit happens for this relationship?
Well, I think to a certain extent, Iain touched on that. I mean, the UK is going to have to build a whole range of important relationships outside the EU, while still building new relationships with the EU. China is an important market. It is an important power in the world, and therefore the UK has to pay real attention to building and developing its relationship from what has been, in recent years, a very successful start after the handback of Hong Kong.
Well, Mr. Cui, I mean, we see the focus changes, right? I mean, at the time when China and the UK established relationship, it's a very different economy China was.
Yes.
Hong Kong returned to China. China already become one of the strongest developing countries, and now second largest economy. What does this relationship mean now for China? I mean, UK is looking at China as one of the most important alternatives if it really leaves the EU. But how does China look at the UK if UK is not part of the EU anymore? Is it still as significant as it used to be?
Yes, I think now mostly it depends on what's the position of UK after it leave from European Union.
We haven't started negotiations yet.
If we believe that, just like Prime Minister May said that she and her country will become a global Britain after the Brexit. I think if so, and I think it would be optimistic.
But it takes
for
time,
the
doesn't it?
Yes. And one more, I think, thing is about, frankly, before the UK leave from European Union, China look at it as a very, very important partner in the European Union, especially to work together with the UK to, fight against with the protectionism, everything.
Right.
But of course now, certainly, the frame is changing. But I think that at the same time, China now has a broader vision on Europe, not only focusing on European Union. We are trying to develop the bilateral cooperation with other parts of Europe. So I don't think there will be a very, very big change after Brexit.
But Mr. Adams, because you're working for the European chambers here and you've been interacting with British businesses here in China every day, what would that mean? I mean, after the UK withdraws from the EU, the UK actually is going back to the very original process with the WTO, much more facing scrutiny when it comes to trade deals and also initiatives. So what would make UK attractive or not that anymore to China, frankly speaking?
Well, I think in terms of the UK's attraction to China, there are probably two areas where the UK has strengths. One is as a provider of world-class services, and as China's economy has developed, it has become more of an economy that needs services. Unfortunately, at the moment, many of those services are essentially closed to foreign participation. But we're very confident that as China continues to develop, it will open up those services, and indeed it's committed to opening up those services. And so that will produce a real opportunity for the UK, and we're already seeing the UK very active in education and looking to be active in healthcare. On the adverse side, China, the UK is very open to investment. It's probably the most open economy in Europe to investment. It's received more investment, foreign direct investment, from around the world than any other economy.
Right.
And it has a very strong investment relationship with China already.
But Mr. Cui, we know that the UK tend to be pragmatic, particularly economically, but we see sudden political changes such as Brexit. So how reliable is this market to China anymore? And secondly, with the rise of populism, it seems to be reflected in the Brexit decision. Will foreign businesses be that much welcomed, and also every deal be done as swift as one would wish? Could that still be the reality, Mr. Cui?
Yes, I think, frankly, comparing with some other European countries, UK did a good job to, keep this open and liberty of market, especially to investment of China. But now, of course, we need to have some more concern about how this change, especially the policy, the continuity of policy after the Brexit.
So we have to go back to the Brexit decision. That is really a big one now. Everybody looking at what's going on behind you, Mr. Begg, the two chambers of the Parliament. Will there be a possibility, Mr. Begg, as Prime Minister May suggested, even without a plan, we're going to do it anyway?
Well, it's very clear from what Theresa May has said that she intends Brexit to happen.
Yeah.
The big question is what form of Brexit. I mean, you heard earlier in the discussion the expression used of hard Brexit. I think we need to be much more fearful of whether it's a hostile Brexit, which would get in the way of British relationships not only with the rest of the EU, but also whether countries like China would regard the UK as a good platform from which to access the rest of the EU. There is a significant risk that it will be hostile, what's been described as a car crash Brexit, and we fear this across all kinds of sectors. Now, even at the London School of Economics, we have many very, very good Chinese students. We're hoping to make an arrangement in future with Fudan University for further collaboration. These are the sorts of things that are vulnerable to the wrong kind of Brexit.
And we don't know what kind of Brexit you're really going to have, because Mr. Adams, after all, it is not just what the EU's Parliament, what the UK's Parliament has decided or not decided, but it also up to the UK's initial or eventual discussion, debate with the European Union, because the European Union are refusing to talk to you guys if you don't have a decision. So what do you think now, from now until, let's just say, Wednesday, might be step by step the sequence of events?
Well, I think the EU has been very clear that it is really waiting for Britain to kick off the process and then it will respond. And I think you also have to remember that we're not just talking about the EU as a single entity, we're talking about 27 other member nation states alongside the UK as the 28th. And so it is going to be an extremely complex negotiation process. And the consensus forming on the EU side will probably be more difficult than it will be on the UK side, even though we have issues such as we've just heard in terms of the path that Scotland is taking.
Yeah.
So I think it is very difficult to speculate on how things are going to unfold and the positions are going to be taken.
I will take your wisdom, Mr. Adams. We want to speculate what's going to happen because it's so far away. So let's just talk about a few days from now. Mr. Begg, first of all, Prime Minister May was talking about the majority, and she seems to get some rebels from different parties likely to support her, even with some oppositions of her own party. But is she strong enough now about having a plan?
Yeah, I think she has enough of a parliamentary majority to make sure that what she wants to happen over the next few days will happen, and then she's in a position to start articulating her demands that will be placed in front of the European Union. She does not face strong opposition because the Labour Party, the principal opposition party in the UK, is very weak and divided. Some of its leadership is in favour of Brexit negotiations, some is not. So I don't see her facing parliamentary opposition. What she will face, though, is concern from financial markets, from the corporate sector, which will be alarmed about the wrong kind of Brexit. And you will see major investors, such as the Japanese company Nissan or even Huawei, they'll all say, be careful what you ask for here, because if you ask for the wrong things, you're going to damage our incentives to be part of the UK economy. That is the biggest fear facing us.
it is not the Chinese, it's not just the Japanese businesses, but also business from elsewhere, including from China. Mr. Adams, how are you explaining to your Chinese counterparts about the uncertainty they're certainly facing these days?
I'm explaining it by explaining the situation, and that in a mature democracy such as is in Europe, we have to deal with these issues from time to time. I mean, this is a pretty momentous one, but it's not something that we haven't had to deal with in the past in terms of entering into new relationships and leaving relationships. So I think, I mean, hopefully what will come through from this is that we will reach a reset of the relationship between the UK and Europe in a mature way that shows the strength of the democratic system.
Well, the reset of relationship, easier said than done, isn't it? It includes so many areas, including that the UK once leaves the EU, you have to set your own standard, and it takes time. And then this is only one of those examples that the UK has to work on its own, and the others have to wait until it comes out with a result. So, Mr. Cui, what should China be prepared for?
Yes, I think firstly, China should try to, convince the UK government to continue this cooperation, and also, of course, at the same time, I think that China should do something more, and also with other European countries, including European Union, because as we know, it will give maybe a kind of stimulation to each other, especially, for example, once China will have the opportunity to have a negotiation with the UK on the free trade. It will give a very, very strong, dynamic to this effort from the European Union to have the same, cooperation with China. So I think now China will also try to take advantage from this. Of course, we need to overcome the uncertainty firstly, and we will try to create some more opportunity from the crisis.
Mr. Begg, you and I have been discussing this before on several occasions about what about its impact also on your foreign policy once the UK really leaves the EU successfully with the Brexit. I mean, earlier, Mr. Begg, you know better than I do that the UK is influential because, of course, you're an influential country, traditionally speaking, but at the same time, a very influential member of the EU. And now, if you leave, are you alone? Are you still going to be as influential as you used to be? And probably even further divide between you and the other EU partners. What would that mean for the UK foreign policy-wise?
Well, on the positive side, you could say that the UK will regain some of its own voice where it's had to bow to what other countries want. So, for example, in saying what the relationship should be with China in the future, with other major parts of the global economy, it can be UK interests first and foremost. The UK will remain a prominent member of NATO, the second biggest after the Americans. So on the defence and the security side, the influence will still be there, plus the seat in the United Nations Security Council. All that remains. But there are many areas where the UK is stronger because it's part of the European Union. An obvious example is the international climate change negotiations, where the collective voice of Europe, let's face it, has been one of the things that has persuaded the Chinese government, the American government, at least until a certain new arrival, to try to go along with those climate change negotiations. So there's two sides to this, some losses, some gains. I don't think the UK will become insignificant in global affairs, but there are important areas where I think it will lose.
Mr. Adams, do you agree with your counterpart back in London?
Yes, I would certainly agree with that in general terms. I think if we look more specifically at the relationship with China, then the UK has a lot of work to do to make up for the loss of the common negotiating power that it has as part of the EU with regards to trade and investment relations between China and the EU. We are in the middle with the EU negotiating a common agreement of investment between China and the EU, and we're very hopeful that that will bring real benefits for European businesses.
I see.
As a British person who's...
Yes, gentlemen, at this point we are already could be having access to some of the signals. The UK Parliament, as we said earlier, is having the lower house debating and voting
the National Audit Office
now
reported that, and I quote exactly,
whether to accept the amendments of the Brexit bill.
Is affecting the morale under
the House of Lords tweaked the bill last week to protect the rights of the EU nationals already living in the UK and guarantee legislators a binding say on the final deal at the end of the exit talks. The bill travels back and forth between the two chambers until both sides agree, and then the EU Withdrawal Bill could complete its final stage. After that, British Prime Minister Theresa May could then trigger Article 50, which formally starts the Brexit process as early as Tuesday. That would allow enough room for EU members to organize a special summit for April the 6th, where EU leaders could approve negotiating guidelines for the European Commission. European Council President Donald Tusk said last week that the EU was ready to respond within 48 hours of getting the official letter of the withdrawal from the British government. As you can see, live signals coming from the chamber of the European Parliament. Debate is still going on. We hope there will be some results. Before we go, I do want to ask you, Mr. Cui, here in Beijing, as the hot debate is going on, always in the British Parliament, what do you think are some of the key issues Britain's partners, including China, should now consider?
I think firstly, of course, stability of politics internally and especially regionally will be the very, very big concern from China or some other partners of UK. Because so far, as we know that certainly once UK will achieve a successful exit from European Union, it will deal with some challenges internally, including Scottish independence and some other. And of course, I think that a very, very favorable or friendly environment to investment, to trade with China or some other partners will be also very big concern. Of course, at the same time, that a new type of relations or arrangement between Britain and the European Union and other European countries will be in the interest of China and some other partners.
So many uncertainties. It only makes our world ever more interesting. And that's the necessity why we need to have the three gentlemen like you to share with us your insights. Cui Hongjian, Iain Begg, Mick Adams. Thank you so much, gentlemen.